Standing up in McKinney, this is According to Callus, episode 603, coming to you on the 18th of March, the year of our Lord 2024. Yes, so just in case you're wondering, I did miss Pi Day. I put an episode out after it, but you know what? I don't think anybody's going to be too upset about that. I did kind of a cutesy episode last year on Pi Day, and St. Patrick's Day is on Sunday. And I don't have much to say about that. And as somebody that I guess technically I'm a 8th Irish, that heritage is just an interesting footnote in my life. So I had intended on doing my normal McKinney Monday and just talking about different things that are going on in the city and how some of them are quite exciting, and that we have to have a certain amount of trust and grace when dealing with things as they play out. But it has been all-consuming for the last week and a half, party stuff. And by that, I mean the Republican Party stuff. So, look, if you don't care about the Republican Party, and there's probably good reason for some of you to not care, now is your chance to tap out. I would ask you not to, but because it's important and it's relevant, and there's, I think, a number of good analogies that I have that I'm going to explain. Before we get into the meat of the program, let me remind you, as always, the best way you can continue to help me grow the show, to spread the word, to grow our influence, grow our input, and make a difference, quite frankly. And we are making a difference. Don't let anybody fool you or tell you otherwise. The purpose of this show is to put out alternative views or, let's say, independent thoughts on things. That doesn't mean that I'm always going to be in agreement or disagreement, just meaning that I'm going to try and approach it from a different way and tell you what I think. And as always, as well, the show is named According to Callus specifically to remind you that everything is based upon my opinion and my understanding. If it is something that is an indisputable fact, I'm try to be very careful about pointing that out or citing where I found that information. If I use the phrases in my understanding or the way I saw it or heard it, I'm keying in on this is, my opinion, or this is my thought or my understanding, not an absolute fact. And I'm very careful to not make accusations because, quite frankly, even if I can back them up, I don't wish to go through the lawsuit. All right. And if you would like to see more or hear more, you can like, share, and subscribe to this program. You can follow us on the social media of your choice. I have a page and a group over at Facebook, and I am a pro now at Gab. And believe it or not, I still drop in on MeWe, and my stuff is still up by and large over at YouTube. Well, without further ado, here we go on with the program. Okay, so I should give some context. The Republican Party, in theory, in the state of Texas, is run by the state chairman through an executive committee. And the executive committee is made up with 62 people, I believe. That's a woman and a man from each Senate district. They show up to quarterly meetings, and they talk about different things about the party. Now, for better or for worse, the SREC, which is the State Republican Executive Committee, again made up with those people, have made a number of decisions over the years of different things they wanted to do, which has got us where we're at now. Now, most of that's not relevant, but there are a couple of asides that may become pertinent later on. Then you have your county party. So there's 254 counties in Texas. Each county should have a county party chairman. Now, the way the TEC, which is the Texas Election Commission, has written the law indicates that every chairman must be elected by a primary election. So we're going to visit that here hard and heavy here in just a minute. And every chairman, in theory, answers to an executive committee made up of precinct chairs. Now, the number of precinct chairs in a county is largely determined, or almost entirely determined, rather, by the population of said county. So you may have a county that really only has 1 or 2 precincts, and then you might have some, like, for instance, Collin County that has north of 250. And some of those districts or precincts, if you will, may not have actual voters in them, but most of us are going to represent a couple thousand voters. We are the grassroots base level representation for anybody that calls themselves a Republican. And we, as precinct chairs, should have and can exert a certain amount of pressure or authority at the county level. And then we have a county chairman. So now that I've explained all this, if we were to make this as another analogy, we could say, if this were the military, the state party chairman would be the equivalent of, say, I don't know, a 4-star general, right? It's the top of the heap, and everybody's taking orders or direction. Now, what's interesting is, as we are all elected officials, we don't necessarily have to take direct orders, but for the purposes of the analogy, the state chairman is the top of the heap. If, depending on how you want to go down, you can then say the SREC, the State Republican Executive Committee, forms either a brain trust, right? The chief of staff, or I forgot what the Prussian word is, but they are supposed to advise and direct the activities of the chair. They report back to their SDs. So in some instances, they are more of a, I'm trying to think of a good analog in the military, courier. They don't have any direct authority by themselves, but when they're meeting together, they have significant authority. So I guess the Joint Chiefs would probably be the best way to phrase that, okay? So then, and again, look, for those of you guys that are in the Army or actually really pay close attention to this, if I'm not getting this 100% accurate, chill. This is trying to explain to people that maybe aren't directly involved or certainly don't have military backgrounds. So it's just a kind of a very simplistic view. So I know there's a whole lot more going on here, okay? Then your county chairs, if you will, would be, I guess, equivalent to either the local general, right? The field general, or perhaps a full bird colonel. In other words, they are supposed to be in charge of their individual county. And then the precinct chairs would come in as, let's say, I don't know, very low-level officers. They're supposed to direct what's going on in their individual precinct. Now, if you look at that, now you've got, again, in some counties, maybe 3 precinct chairs, but in others, you got 250. So you got a whole lot of people that are, let's say, entry-level officers, and those entry-level officers want to believe in times that they should be dictating terms to the bird colonel that's running things. Okay, so that and again, that's my understanding of what's going on and just kind of setting up a scenario. Then you have the team, the executive team at most county levels. They'll have an executive director if they're large enough. They may have people that work on the voting. They may have other sundry duties, and they have vice chairs and other volunteers. And at that place, we would put them at mid-level officers. But interestingly enough, almost none of them have any authority whatsoever. But be that as it may, we'll just, for the purposes of this discussion, we're going to make them majors. Or if you prefer, I can't even think. I guess a full lieutenant, right? So, and again, I'm mixing my branches here. Let me pause for just a second, make sure I get this right. It won't make sense. All right. So if we're going to do this analogy properly, let's put it that way, precinct chairs would be the equivalent of a second or a first lieutenant, perhaps, maybe just a high-ranking sergeant, because we're going to use Army, right? So we're going to stick with Army. And the appointed members, right, the vice chairs and executive team, they might be a captain or perhaps a major. Again, mid-level or low-level officers within the military. And a major doesn't have any authority, or a lieutenant or a captain doesn't have any authority outside of their scope. But your lieutenant colonel or your full colonel, they're in charge of that area. They're in charge of that base, perhaps, right? And again, I was never in the Army, so I'm not looking to make this as an exact diagram. It's more of just an analogy so people can wrap their heads around it. Now, we're going to leave out all the warrant officers and everything else. So in theory, every voter is a private. So they have some say. They're part of our army. They are the ones that get us the election. Now, some of them might become, private first classes or corporals. And if they're volunteers, might think of them as a specialist. In other words, they have a special duty that they do on behalf of us as the Republican Party. But again, I don't want to go too far in the weeds here. Just suffice it to say, we're all a team, and the team has a hierarchy, or an army if you prefer, right? We're all an army. The army has a hierarchy, and there's a certain expectation that things are going to work together to get things done. You don't want your sergeant countermanding orders from your colonel, because in theory, the colonel has far more information and far more understanding of what's going on than, some buck sergeant or something, right? I want to make sure I get these right. Or a corporal. Obviously, you get to a sergeant first class. If they're anything like the chiefs I served under, I'm probably going to listen to them really closely, even though there's an ensign or a lieutenant junior grade giving me orders. That's Navy right there, right? So, keeping that in mind, now I'm going to transfer that to Collin County. Okay? So, I would phrase this as, if you have a long-term precinct chair, somebody that's been a precinct chair for, let's say, more than 5 years, I would think that in the purposes of this discussion, this analogy, perhaps they're a sergeant or higher, right? Because they have experience, because they know what's going on. They're still not like officer here because they didn't run for that higher officer. They don't serve on some kind of board or whatever. But from time to time, they may be put in charge of a committee, or they might be running something. So they have what I'm going to refer to as a battlefield promotion, right? Or a brevet, I think is the proper term, where we're going to give you this rank temporarily to serve this purpose. And when it's done, you're going to revert back to what you were, right? So the problem is some of the folks that get those temporary ranks think it's a permanent rank, and they want to exceed both their authority and their experience to start dictating terms to everybody else around them. Now, then you're getting into the part where they start countermanding or trying to supersede other orders. Now, again, I realize this is probably not the best analogy, but I'm just trying to give you a frame of reference. So, if you are looking at Collin County Republican Party, which is the party I belong to, and I have been involved in for well over 10 years at this point. I had a break because I moved, but in my current position, I've been there for about 2 years. Prior to that, I was there for, north of 8 years. Best I can remember off the top of my head. And I stayed involved the entire time I was not a precinct chair because, quite frankly, I couldn't go away. I served in other ways. Now, in this time, there were a number of people that I befriended, that I learned from, that I acknowledged they have a certain expertise or experience that I don't have. So when I have questions, when I'm looking at things, I try and ask or try and defer certain decisions until I have a greater scope or understanding. Okay, jumping back in here. Had an unscheduled interruption. So, long story short, right? I mean, I've laid all this out. I've eaten up a good 10, 12 minutes here of my time to explain the hierarchy and how things are, at least in theory, designed and supposed to work. So, we have a number of people that have been around for, let's say, less than 5 years. Now, that's neither bad nor good. It's just, when you've been around less than 5 years, you have a limited understanding of certain things. Now, look, I came in at this point probably 12 years ago. I was hard charging. I thought I knew everything. I was going to change the world. So I relate to these folks. They are me 10 or 12 years ago. I get it. But over that time, I learned, and again, I'm rehashing old stuff here. I know, but it's important. It all ties together. I learned there are certain things I don't know. That I'm not the colonel, that I'm not, high enough up in the hierarchy, if you will, to understand exactly what's playing out. So as a result of that, I speak with this experience. I have a certain amount of, let's call it authority or understanding, experience that I've tried in multiple times to explain and share. Now, as a member of the party and being around for a long time, I've crossed swords, metaphorically, with a number of people that were there long before me. I've always tried to be respectful. I've always tried to be fair. I've tried to focus on issues. These are specific issues or different things that we disagree on, but at no point would I come out and say, well, I should say with rare exemptions, right? That this person's not a good Republican, or this person isn't Republican enough, or this person isn't a conservative enough. There is a tent, a big tent, if you will, in the Republican Party. And one of the challenges we have is the purity test that is always appearing. Now, look, I've been guilty of it in the past, and to a certain degree, I want a level of quote-unquote purity. I don't want people that are essentially Democrats, progressive socialists, coming to the Republican Party claiming to be Republicans because they agree with us on 2 or 3 key issues. I'm not comfortable with that. But on the flip side, if I'm agreeing with somebody on the 80% or 70%, I'm not wanting to cast them aside. I don't want to throw them away. We can't win races. We can't make a difference if we can't win. And the way we win is with people. And we have to have a big enough army. Now, sometimes you have armies that have weak spots, or that they're reserve soldiers or whatever, and you set them to the side. You don't put them on the front line. They're not your main force. Perhaps you put them in supply. Be careful about putting them in intelligence, but personnel. There's other things that these folks can do, and they're good quality people. They're just maybe not frontline soldiers. We shouldn't hold that against them. And honestly, if you spend more time around them and you interact with them and you're fair and you treat them well, they may come more like you. They may become more, let's say, more conservative, or at least firmer in their convictions that they already have, and they may become more agreeable that we set aside the smaller things and focus on the big things and go for it. This is how a team is built. This is how we win battles. And when you win battles, you end up winning the war. Unless, of course, that's a different story. I'm not going to go down that road. You know where I was going if you know anything about Army and history. So you see, you can have a large army with an elite force that wins the battles, and they're supported and supplied by those folks that maybe aren't top tier fighting forces, but you still need them. A modern army is dependent upon all the support people. You don't cast them aside because they're not you. You don't cast them aside or denigrate them because they're slightly different, or they don't feel as strongly, or they don't advocate the same way, or they don't get things done the same way. There is a long list of things that you're supposed to do as a precinct chair. I suppose that every precinct chair out there doesn't do every one of them. I would imagine to put a requirement that you must do every one of them would severely hamper and degrade the ability of the Army to operate, if you will, in this analogy. It would put us in a position where we couldn't field enough forces to go and win. Now, this is where it gets difficult, because now you've got some people, say they've been in 4 or 5 years, and they want positions of authority. They want to move up the ladder, if you will. They want to exert a certain amount of influence on how things get done. So you put them in a position where they can do some things. You give them opportunities to succeed or fail on their own. And when they get there and they do things that are not successful, and then they proceed to blame everybody else for their failures, without acknowledging or considering that there might be other things going on. And for those of you wondering, yes, I am indeed going to go down the primrose path of the the candidate vetting committee. The candidate vetting committee, right? These are the same folks that have a record currently of 4-17-2. Now, we're going to use another analogy here. If you're a boxing trainer, right, and your fights, right, your record of all the different fighters you used was 4-17-2, Why would any potential boxer want to take advice or training from you? Why would any potential boxer that's looking to move up go to somebody with a losing record? I mean, it's your job to train them up. It's your job to pick the correct fights. It's your job to make them successful, and you failed to do so. I mean, look, I don't follow boxing that much, but I know there's this guy, Jake Paul, who's like, I don't know, 20 or whatever, 30 years younger than Mike Tyson. I don't think you could pay me enough money and train me enough that I would even be willing to get into a ring with Mike Tyson, even at his current age, and I was 30 years younger. So you as a trainer need to make sure that your boxer knows you're outmatched there, you're outclassed, you're outweighed, whatever. You don't get into that fight. You're not ready, or you're never going to be ready. But that's not what we did. We threw our people to the wolves, and our people got destroyed. And I tell you what, to the best of my knowledge, very few of them have any interest in running for anything else going forward. And why would they? Now, you can blame the party, you can blame everybody else, or you can accept that maybe they weren't ready. Perhaps we made a bad choice. Perhaps we didn't consider all the things going on. Perhaps as somebody that is at a lower rank officer here, I should have conferred more with the general or the colonel. I should have looked at the bigger picture. I should have visited with the intelligence people some more. I should have considered there's other things going on, but you failed. And the last thing I want to do is give somebody that has led us in multiple battles that we got our tails kicked and promote them and put them in a position with more power and more authority. But apparently that's what we want to do in the Collin County GOP. So in the remaining 10 minutes or so, this directly ties into the next portion of the project here. So I've been around, I guess at this point, for Fred Moses, George Flint, Mark Reed, Abraham George, John Myers. And I was around but not deeply involved before that. And each one of these chairmen had certain things that they did and certain things they wanted to accomplish. And what's interesting to me is when we brought in our new crop of people, right? The people that are the new recruits, they came in hard charging. They thought they knew what was best. They thought that they knew better. I'm not sure what they based that off of, but there was enough of them that partnered with some disaffected leadership, right? In every army, there's going to be leaders that are underutilized or perhaps poorly utilized, and they grade at that. They want more, better opportunities. They want to be able to be promoted. And if you've got a general, or in this case a bird colonel, that's staying in their way, they may be apt to look at, is this colonel really worthy of being in charge? So we watched this play out, at this point, I want to say it was 3 years ago, where there was a number of disaffected people that came in, and then there was a number of leadership people that had had enough. And, wait, let me take an aside here. And this is an important analogy. Every peasant revolt against the king failed unless the nobles joined with them, or some of the nobles joined with them. That's just something you want to consider. Every revolution, every revolt, when it was led by just the people, fails. They have to bring some of the nobles with them. They have to, get some of the people that intercede on their behalf and become clear that their king is a tyrant in order to successfully overthrow them. So essentially that's what happened the first time around. The two groups teamed up and they dismissed Mark Reed. And yes, I'm glossing over a whole lot of detail here. And just in case anybody's wondering, Mark made some mistakes. He owns part of that. And I like Mark. I thought very highly of Mark. I was happy to serve under Mark. But when your own leadership team has kind of had enough, that's a good clue. I'm just saying. And again, I don't know all the details. What I do know is the leadership was disappointed, and the foot soldiers, right? The new leadership, they wanted certain things done. And rather than having a conversation and accommodating some of the concerns, it got out of hand. Then we transitioned into by almost exact popular acclaim, Abraham George. And I was thrilled that he won, and I was happy to work with him. And I thought he was a very solid guy. Most of the leadership that had now gotten what they wanted. They wanted a new leader that was affable, that was agreeable, that wanted to work with people. And then the same folks, by and large, that agitated to get rid of Mark moved on to, 6 months later, 8 months later, disaffection because they didn't get everything they wanted. Well, let me tell you something. Pretty sure that a guy like Patton wouldn't have tolerated that either. So in this instance, Abraham pushed back. Abraham said, no, that's a bad idea. No, we're not going to do this. And he was in a position to know better, having served on the SREC, having led a club. Here's the guy that's now in charge of the county party, and he's looking at things and, we got to raise money. We got to not disaffect people. We've got to work with all these different factions and groups. How do we do this? So he's working on all that, and all the while, the same folks that had run off Mark Reed, not the leadership, because most of the leadership is now happy with the change, are already working to undermine. Now, they were content for 6 months because they thought they were going to get what they wanted. But then when they found out that you can't just have carte blanche, you don't get everything you want, they immediately started to push back. They started to cause trouble. We spent the better part of 2 years watching each and every meeting at the executive committee being disrupted by people that wanted what they wanted. Regardless if it was what was best, regardless of what the leadership thought, they knew better. And at some point, I guess at this juncture, 6 months ago, Abraham's presented an opportunity. We want you to run against Candy Noble. Candy's been a state rep. She's no longer representing the county or the people of her district in a way that we're happy with. We want you to run. You're Abraham, and you're looking at this as an opportunity. Yeah, I mean, I'm not happy with it either. Let's go run. And honestly, there's a lot of people that aren't happy with the way I'm trying to get the party on war stance, that's my interpretation, right? I'm trying to get us prepared for battle. They're not happy. They want what they want, regardless if it's right or wrong. So this is a good way to get out and work on something bigger, potentially. So Abraham steps out. We get John Myers in by pretty much popular acclaim as well. The precinct chairs, by a 2/3 majority, said John's the right guy. And look, again, another guy I've been around for a long time, I think the world of. Both John and Abraham, solid, great guys, did what they did for the party at great sacrifice. So then I see today, now I don't know what happened sometime this past week, and boy, I'm going to run late, folks, so just bear with me here. Abraham's being attacked for having business troubles, apparently. Now, I don't know all the details. I consider Abraham a friend. We've done things together. We've done things outside of politics, and we've done lots of things in politics together. But I do know that man basically gave up his entire life for close to 2 years to try and run the party and right the ship. And I will tell you, his predecessor had problems with his business because of the amount of time they donated to run the party. And for the very same people to then come after them and poke fun and denigrate them for taking on a volunteer job that, quite frankly, most of them are not qualified to do, nor capable of doing, and not willing to do, they're going to run this guy into the ground. Give me a break. Give me a break. And then, on top of that, to disparage and talk smack about a guy like John Myers, and the same idea here, the guy gave years, decade plus to his life, to the county party, to the Republican Party. He got sick. And his first concern as far as the party went is find a good, solid person to replace him. Don't worry about all the details. People can run if they want to run, but you want to find a good quality successor. He did that. Now, you might not like the way it was done. You might have questions of whether or not it was the best choice, whatever, but that was John's call. And to a certain degree, you got to give that guy credit, a lot of credit, for willing to put in the time and the effort to do that when his own health is at critical levels here. He set aside time that he could have been with his family, that he could have spent with his friends, out of concern for the party that he loved. And you guys want to spend time attacking that guy for doing that? For finding a worthy successor? Shame on you. So now as we're looking at this and things are playing out over the weekend, it became public knowledge that Abraham's going to be running for for state chair, having served as a county chair. And I'll tell you, I know that's another job that really doesn't pay anything. It's a big job. There's a lot of important things, and you have to fundraise, and you have to do those things. And you can say what you want, but Abraham did better at fundraising than anybody before him. Abraham worked his tail off, basically for free, mind you, for the party, and his reward was to go and run against an entrenched candidate that had to have the governor come visit 5 times in order to win. Now think about that. If you're such a good quality candidate, if you support the county so well, you would think that you would be able to pull north of 60% of the vote. Yeah, I know what some of you are thinking right now. Well, Leach and Shaheen got north of 60. Well, you could say what you want about Leach, but he's effective at what he does. You can say what you want about the guy, but he spends his money well. He campaigns well, and he wins. You don't have to like him. You just have to acknowledge that he's good at what he does. The same could be said about Matt Shaheen. Now, I have a soft spot for Matt. I've always been honest about that. There are some friends of mine that are not happy that I feel that way. But the truth is Matt's always been the most solid one. The one that actually takes the time to call me back, that we have discussions and we talk about the bigger picture here. Now, we don't have to agree. We're part of the Republican Party. Guess what? You're allowed to disagree with people. I don't necessarily want a party that's in complete lockstep. I do want a party that follows the Constitution. I do want a party that stands by its principles. I do want a party that advocates for liberty. But by and large, the party already does that. So if I don't get a perfect candidate, I want a decent candidate. I want a better candidate. We had that. So the same people, or let me rephrase this, largely the same group of people that were instrumental in chasing off Mark Reed, were instrumental in making Abraham very uncomfortable, then went and tanked his race against an entrenched incumbent that they all stated at the beginning they wanted all these people to go, right? All the incumbents, they're weak, they're terrible, and oh, by the way, they impeached Paxton. Now, whether that did it for you or not, you're free to have your own opinion. You're free to support who you want to support. But you can't show up at an executive committee meeting and make all sorts of hay about how you're ready to get rid of Candy Noble, Jeff Leach, Matt Shaheen, Frederick Frazier, and then turn around and support those same incumbents after you just said the other thing out of your mouth. That's not cool. And there's a number of people that ought to know better that did that very thing. They apparently decided they would rather have the entrenched incumbent in Candy Noble than take a chance that the guy that they didn't agree with all the time and then actually had the audacity to push back against them, Abraham George. No, we're going to work against the guy that we were acclaiming 2 years ago, acclaiming 6 months ago when they went to go run against the entrenched incumbent. No, we're going to now work against him. We're going to tank his race. Now, say what you want, but for a first-time run at a high-level office against an entrenched incumbent to drive it to basically a 5-point spread, which means that you lost by approximately 2.5 points, right? 47.4 or 47.6, whichever it was. That's great. Keeping in mind that the governor had to come to town 5 times to help the other candidates, including Candy Noble. So these same people that turned their back at what the grassroots people wanted, which was new people to go represent them down in Austin, these same people are now showing up again, determined that they know what's better for running the county party. Oh, and by the way, now we want more power and authority for the organizational situation that we had where we kept putting our fighters in to lose. So our organization, our group, we are so good that we're going to take somebody that's qualified and has experience to be the county chair and find somebody else to run against them. And now that we've done that, we're going to twist the arms and manipulate people to give us more power and more authority with our candidate committee that we've already shown to be an utter complete failure. 4-17-2, folks. Again, if you're a trainer for a boxer and you're trying to sell a boxer that how good you are, and you tell him, yeah, I went 4-17-2, yeah, I'm running the other way too. But look, as a trainer, you can make all the excuses you want, but it was ultimately your responsibility. And I'm going to also address one last thing related to that. Even if the party would have given them an extra $1,000, even if the party would have given them the mythical boost out of Austin. Now, keep in mind, these are the same people that are anti-Austin and all about the grassroots, but hey, they wanted the state party to jump in on this. For a municipal race, think. All right. Now, one interesting aside that is, again, directly related to this. In between election cycles, the executive committee votes to replace or install a new chair. Currently, the law is, and the way the Republican Party of Texas operates is every 2 years, there is an election for each state chairman. Now, problem number one is we don't have closed primaries. We all understand that. But the proposed solutions vary. And we talked about this in platform committee, and I think the majority of my committee is quite happy with our solution. I'm not 100% on board. But guess what? As a party, we can agree to disagree. I'm not willing to say that the people that want one thing are a bunch of elitist scum and I don't agree with them, because that's not true. I know all these people. I've served with these people in one way or shape or form before. I know where their heart is. They're trying to protect the party. I get it. But ultimately, if the Republican Party wants to be a grassroots party, wants to serve the will of the people, having it led by 100 people or decided and controlled by 25 people is not a grassroots party. It is not something that reflects the will of the people. If you don't believe me, again, going back to the candidate committee, 4-17-2, by the way, in the last cycle, 20 people cannot adequately divine what's best for a county of 1.2 million people. They just cannot. I'm not sure that 100 can do it that much better than that 20 can. But guess what? You get to 500, 600, maybe you have a better idea. If you take input from people that, I don't know, disagree with you or have a different viewpoint, but want the same things, you might have a better understanding of what's going on. Perhaps you should take people that actually live in those communities and interview them and what they think the community needs or desires or wants before you make these recommendations. And I'm sorry, I see an argument why you wouldn't want to make every municipal race partisan. I see that argument. I still think in most races, a partisan race is the better way to go, particularly if you live in Collin County, because we're still majority Republican. Now, how long are we going to stay that way with our current rate, with the current nonsense? Who knows? There's a group of people that are hell-bent and driving us into the ground, in my opinion. They just don't realize that's what they're doing. And one last analogy. You don't want somebody taking over the plane that's never had flight lessons or never landed a plane. It's not going to end well. And if by chance they do manage to land the plane and not kill anybody, that is by the grace of God, not their skill or their efforts. Now, I want you to consider this. I can like both candidates equally. I can feel comfortable that both of them have, let's call them, pure heart and wise mind. But when given the choice between somebody that has a bunch of experience, good relationships, and quite frankly, been there, done that, and somebody that's done none of the above, all other things being equal, I'm going with the person that has experience. I'm going with the person that's been there and done that. I'm going with the person that's been successful in what they've done and running for office previously and working with people that don't necessarily agree with them to get a certain amount of things done. That's what I'm going with. Now, as a Republican, I'm going to tell you, you're free to choose. You can support the person that you want. You can put your faith in somebody that will likely meet the same opposition from the same group of people that the previous two chairmen, or actually three at this point, have met. As soon as she doesn't give them, that wasn't nice. As soon as either one of them doesn't give
this same group of people everything that they want, they're going to push back. They're going to fight. They're going to do these things. Now, I get both of them are going to not take that well. Both of them are going to be able to push back. But again, I'm going to default to somebody that's been there, done that, has that experience over somebody that talks a good game. And I got to be fair. At this point in my life, I just talk a good game. I've run committees. I've run, I've helped with fundraisers. I've run an election. I've done a number of different things. I do have some of those t-shirts, but I've never run the party. I've never run an organization. Well, I guess that's not entirely true. I've ran a club, or I've helped run a club, but I've not been on the city council. I've not had to cut deals with people that, actually have different values than I do. But that's what you do when you're elected in office. You have to work with the other side. You have to get the best deal that you can. And I would much rather have somebody that's skilled at doing that than somebody that does not. So when I look at the big picture, and bear with me a couple more minutes here. When I look at the big picture of my county party, my Collin County GOP, and I see the utter disarray and the lack of unity, I don't think we fix it by giving a group of people everything that they want, because they've already shown themselves to not be capable of doing well with the things they had already. You don't reward bad behavior. You don't reward failure. That's just a bad idea. You got to focus on what we do well. You got to focus on working together. And I don't want those people to leave. But what I do want them to do is understand they don't have an answer for everything. They don't know everything. And they have to be open to, the idea that people disagree with them. Good people disagree with them. We need to get out of this purity spiral and focus on winning races, remembering who the enemy, or if you will, the opponent is. It's leftist, progressive, socialist Democrats. Not necessarily in that order, not necessarily all grouped together. Individually, they're all equal threats. And you can't fight them accordingly if you don't understand that's what you're fighting. If you're spending all your time in the circular firing squad that we've been doing for some time now, and then inviting in the enemy, in case you're wondering, that's Joshua Frick, I'm sorry. You got to think clearly. You got to know what we're doing, and you got to be cautious. You got to be smart. You don't just follow the latest whim. You don't just follow the latest guy to jump in and say, follow me. You got to check out their track record. You got to know what you're dealing with. You got to have some level of confidence that that person's been there, done that, and they're going to get us over the hump. They're a leader worth following. Everybody's a leader. Everybody wants to be a leader, but they don't want to accept the responsibility that comes with it, or the consequences that come when you fail. If you doubt me, look no further than Collin GOP. And as a last comment here, my best to John Myers and his family. I wish you the best. I grieve for where you're at, but I know you're going to go home with your Creator. And with that, this has been According to Callus, and I will see you on the other side.